name's Nick Motteram. I'm a co-founder of Market and been working with the Hydrowood team for the last couple of months, getting them sorted out and ready for the crowdfunding raise. Look, really pleased to be working with the Hydrowood guys, Andrew and David, who are joining us tonight. Look, fantastic business, ticks a lot of right boxes for crowdfunding. Basically, they're doing this crowdfunding raise to bring along the followers and supporters of Hydrowood and believers in what they're doing, to become part of the business and become a part of their future success. So look, I'd like to welcome Andrew Morgan and Dave Wise, who are co-founders of Hydrowood, to the session. Look, as many of you know, equity crowdfunding raises, basically it allows all retail investors to invest and participate in the capital raising. Invest as little as $500. If you do want to invest more than $10,000, you need to qualify as a sophisticated investor. So very happy to answer any questions in relation to that. But basically, Hydrowood, they're looking to raise a minimum of $2 million and this offer. We're very close to that number at the moment, getting close to 1.9 million raised already, with another 7 days to go. So we do see this being a very successful raise and closing successfully at the end of the offer next Thursday. So I would recommend getting in, if you are keen to invest, ask any questions you have tonight, and getting involved in the offer, because I think we should have a strong close in the final 7 days. But look, it's enough from me. I'll hand it over to Andrew and Dave to give an introduction to the business and who they are and what they're doing. And we'll take it from there. Actually, look, in the first instance, we actually have a short video that we're going to play just to give everyone a bit of a snapshot about the business and what they're up to.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Nick.
The basic premise of Hydrowood is that we are harvesting timber that was submerged 30 years ago with the hydropower in 1979. Myself and my business partner, Dave, were having a beer one night, and I think he suggested the idea, which I told him was bloody stupid. No, look, he'd been to British Columbia, so they use the rivers there to transport timber to get them to the mill, and sometimes trees sink. People started realising that there were trees underwater they could pull back up, and they were still fresh. It was really sort of a thought around these trees here have been underwater for 30 years. It's dark, it's cold. They probably haven't started to deteriorate, so why would that be the same process as what was in British Columbia? So we went to the University of Tasmania and said, hey, would you guys help us out on this? And we went and pulled some trees out using divers and tested them, and they were okay. When we first started, there was a whole lot of negative sentiment towards the concept. Can't be done, you're mad. You won't be able to build a barge that will do the harvesting. The wood won't be okay. We can only get out small logs. Spurred us on. I enjoy pushing back and proving people wrong. When we went to Hydro and the government more broadly said, hey, we want to do this, there was a level of scepticism. We really needed to show that we were going to be good custodians of the lake and how we operated. So there's no divers in the water. It's cold and dark. We needed to be able to build something mechanised that would safely be able to harvest trees. And we went and built a barge called Hydrowood 1, which is very creatively named. It's driven by 3 thrusters, and it's got a 45-tonne excavator that can harvest the tree by going down into the water column, grabbing the tree and cutting it, and then pulling it back up. There's an untapped resource here. It was an old forest. It's getting a second chance, so it's great to see it being put to use in really iconic fields that have got great stories.
Thanks, Nick, and hello, everyone. So I'm obviously Andrew, the bearded one, and David.
Dave, thanks for joining.
So I'm just going to run through, I guess, why we're doing the crowd raise, and please start putting questions into the panels there so Nick can ask them as we go. I assume a lot of you have probably already been through the website, the offer document, are aware with of the basic project. So if we start to see a bank of questions, we'll jump straight to them. But in essence, the process that we've been through over the last 8 years has been one of de-risking. So we've gone through the process of developing the equipment, proving up the resource, and showing that that resource can be indeed harvested, milled, dried, and really importantly, put into products, into projects that are now been in the environment for 3, 4, or 5 years. And that piece gives that timber being in projects then gives confidence to the architects and specifiers that what they are dealing with here is indeed just wood. It's wood with a fantastic provenance, a fantastic story. It's also wood that some of those species you cannot get terrestrially anymore, but it acts like wood. And so when we have put it on buildings, in buildings, it hasn't turned up its toes, it hasn't cracked, it hasn't split, it does what wood does. So as long as you treat it with the same level of care that you would with any other timber product, it acts like timber. And that was really important in engaging, I guess, being able to talk to architects and to specifiers and builders, now being able to point to projects and give them the confidence to specify this at scale. We started off developing relationships with a lot of furniture manufacturers and designer makers. And those guys, they have smaller products. They build a table, they build a lounge. It's a one-off. If there's problems with those things, then those issues can be rectified. But to get the confidence of those larger commercial and residential builds, we needed to go out and show projects in the extant environment. Go over to the next slide, please. So just in terms of the process, you would have seen the video there. In effect, we're harvesting the tree by cutting it. We're not pulling it. So it's a very important environmental consideration. We actually are cutting that tree cleanly, usually leaving quite a lot of the stem in the water column to remain as fish habitat, but also we're not pulling out the stump to cause any sedimentation in the lake. We then slew it onto a barge, which once it's full is then taken back to the landing where we grade the timber and have it ready to go to market. Next slide, please, Quinn. I'll leave that one for you, though.
Yeah, so once we've got the logs out of the lake, they're taken onto the landing, and from that point it turns into fundamentally a fairly traditional forestry operation, even though the logs are full of water and the saps come out over the years they've been in the lake, since 1984 roughly. Goes in the truck and off to the sawmill. We mill them when they're still wet, so that you actually see the water come out of the lumber as it's being cut, and that's worked out quite well. The saws like it, and that's not a disadvantage at all. We then take the sawn boards and rack them out with sticks in between them so that the air can move through in our dry mill, which is actually at Hagley, and we're leaving there. It's about a year, depending on the thickness of the boards, and that gets it down to around 20% moisture content, what we call environmental moisture content, which is at the point where it can become kiln dried, and then we take it down to industry standard, which is about 8 to 10%. So if you go and buy a board at Bunnings or any hardware shop in a rack, it'll be sitting at around that 8 to 10%. Interestingly, if you want to use it for boat building or some sort of outside use, we actually might not kiln it. Celery top's an interesting example where we used it outside on a few projects, and we actually left it at 20% because it's stable in the environment at that moisture content. Then it's off to the dry mill and gets processed into whatever format we may want. So if we're going to turn into a fully dressed board, as again you might see in the hardware store, that gets run through the dry mill in that processing stage, onto the truck and off to the market, and that's the supply chain completed. So it's about 12 to 18 months for us to do that whole process, from pulling the log out of the lake through to sale.
Next slide, please, Flynn. So just in terms of the timber species, if any of you are Tasmanians, you'll be familiar with them. But if you're not familiar with the Tasmanian species, it's quite they're quite different. Endemic to Tasmania in many cases. So Tas oak, a group of eucalypt species, synonymous with Vic ash, blackwood, sassafras, myrtle, and cellartop pine. Huon pine is sort of the king of the timbers. It's worth a lot of money. It's very valuable, but it's also very rare. So we get a little bit of it, but all of those species have different applications. Cellartop in particular, we can use for external claddings and as well as internal cladding, internal linings, flooring, and the same with myrtle and Tas oak. They can be used internally for those floorings and linings, and particularly in that furniture space. Next slide, please. So this is, I guess, to me, this epitomised the concept of Hydrowood. This is limestone house in Toorak. John Wardle and his team designed this, but the client actually came to the Hydrowood Lake back in 2016, David Sutton, and he wanted to create something pretty special. He wanted to create a passive house under some very strict environmental guidelines, and he wanted to only use reclaimed timber, and in fact he chose Hydrowood. So everything you can see there that's timber is actually Hydrowood and Hydrowood oak, and so including that table. And so he has become somewhat of an ambassador for us, but I guess he wanted to show off the fact that we could use a reclaimed timber at scale, and he considered that table and tell people about the provenance of this timber, the truly amazing story that it was underwater, and he's always going to have something to talk about at the dinner party. And to me and to Dave, I know that was this storytelling piece was always really important, and it was really gratifying to have David come to the lake and be able to complete that circle so he can talk to people with some clarity. And also John Wardle's obviously become a very valued ambassador as well. Next slide. And this is just some other examples of the use of Hydrowood. We're starting to deal with some fairly large commercial architects and designers. Snow Hedder, arguably one of the largest architectural firms in the world, and that was a piece of furniture designed by John Goulder and made by John Goulder based out of Adelaide. The top panel there, all that timber you can see is actually a collaboration between David Jones and Levi's, a sustainability fit out. So they're actually there portraying Hydrowood. They were telling the Hydrowood story, and I think we're going to start to see a lot more of those sort of concepts as this ESG framework continues to roll out, particularly for those larger corporates. And then down the bottom, we've got a small image there of Macquarie House in Launceston, highlighting the cellartop pine being used outside. The committee rooms in Parliament House in Tasmania, that's all of our material on the table, and the ministers and politicians all speak to Hydrowood with some reverence every time that they're meeting around that table, so that's always nice. Myrtle flooring, and then another piece of furniture by John Goulder at the end there, which I think that's now sitting in the Victorian Art Gallery, Melbourne Victorian Gallery of Arts. Next slide, please. So in terms of growth opportunities, so we've built this concept, it works, we've got markets, we want to grow the opportunity, and the reason for the crowdfunding, the main, is around the working capital to put more wood in the shed. We've grown organically to this point. We want to be able to harvest more, process more. This is like whiskey. There's that holding period. We've got to mill the timber, as Dave said, hold it in a store to dry for 12 to 18 months, and then finish it and sell. So there's a heavy working capital piece here. But there's a number of other opportunities. All our forecasts based on the offer document all are based on production of timber from the lakes in Tasmania, and producing our core business, which is timber. But there is a number of opportunities. So Victorian government has been having conversations with us about Lake Hume as a potential. Obviously in Victoria, they've just announced that they're ceasing native forest logging on the 1st of January 2024. They've brought that forward by 6 years. It was in 2030. So they're interested in where they can potentially get other resource from. International opportunities, we've got an MOU signed with a Brazilian group in terms of exploring some opportunities over there with Brazilian lakes. The same with British Columbia. We've had an NGO, Dave was just there recently and met with them regarding some opportunities there to do the same sort of thing. And again, we may end up just consulting or selling our IP to them to leverage the brand and the opportunity, but there's opportunities to partner and there's opportunities to consult. We think biomass is a huge opportunity. Not all of the tree is suitable for timber, and with various parties looking for fuel for green methanol, green hydrogen, green chemical, green biofuel, we're certainly seeing the opportunity to use that other piece of the log that isn't suitable for timber in a biomass facility. And the other one's methane abatement. So Dave and I, our day job, our other part of our business is managing large plantation assets for fund managers or for funds. And we had a project with the property manager. We've got a team of 28 working for us. And we've heavily become involved in carbon offsets and ACU development. And we think there's an opportunity with Hydrowood to potentially develop a revenue stream through a methane abatement or emission abatement, potentially through a VERA, which is one of the voluntary schemes. So again, none of these are what we've got in the core forecast, but there are plenty of opportunities there to grow additional revenue streams.
Just while you're on that point, Andrew, as well, we had a question that came through just in relation to the licensing of your IP and your solutions, selling that as a revenue stream. It'd be good to maybe provide a bit more colour on how that might work. You mentioned obviously in Brazil and Canada, but
yeah, well, certainly with the IP around the vessel itself, we own the naval architecture of that, which has worked out pretty well. We wouldn't actually change that much. So we could potentially, the Brazilian example, they've actually asked us how much it would cost to build another one of those, and we'd probably provide them with that naval architecture, and we wouldn't build it. We'd get one of the shipbuilders to construct it. So there's the IP in that sense. There's also the IP around the system. And that was one of the things we spent a lot of time developing with the University of Tasmania and through our research to ensure the cutting and the drying process was nailed down. So that actually that's a core piece of our intellectual property. We think is actually the ability to not only pull the log out of the water, but the ability to turn it into a saleable product that we've got confidence in.
Yeah, and I guess further to that, Nick, just regarding the question of IP and that sort of technological solution, I think the question of it is being around, can we, so the IP, as I said in the last webinar, the IP in my mind is that we can very quickly look at a lake and develop a yes/no framework. Will that work? Can we scale this to another lake we don't understand outside of Tasmania? And yes, we can. So the same principles of utilising old photography or satellite imagery to work out a presence and absence of that area first. So a lot of you using a lot of spatial and GIS data, then taking and running sonar over the top of the lake to work out whether those trees are still there. And then you'd go down to a point where you're doing destructive testing. You're taking some samples out, testing that material. Is it still sound? Yes or no? That to me is where our IP lays. And then taking yes, there is possibly a valuable resource here, and taking it further and going, we can now look at the logistics of how do we extract that resource and get it to a mill for processing. That, whilst I've made it sound pretty simple, isn't, but it's a combination of the skill sets that we've developed over years of forestry, land use, marine activities, and understanding, I guess, man-made impoundments and how they've come about. So do we sell the product around that technological solution? I'm not sure we sell the product. I think we probably would be selling the services to potential proponents. We can't do all of the lakes in terms of Hydrowood, but we certainly could do a lot of work around developing up a project and then perhaps then handing off a unit or selling a unit or selling the IP packaged ready for someone else to come into that lake and provide that solution.
On that point, another question that's come in is in around, I suppose, the competitors in the space and what barriers to entry you've got around what you're operating and what you're doing.
Yeah, in terms of the barriers to entry, the barriers are high, and it's not necessarily about the machinery. I mean, we're in Sydney at the moment. I ran past a barge this morning with an excavator sitting on it. You know, that's not unique. It's the merging of understanding around environmental compliance, large machinery on water, safety systems, environmental systems, certification. We're certified by a global forest management system, which is the only one in the world that is certified. So we're the only company in the world certified to PEFC, or Responsible Wood Standard, globally for sound forest management practices on underwater harvesting operation. Those are the barriers to entry that, when we're dealing with government and government agencies, they would expect, and I think this is anywhere, certainly in Australia, if not the world, they're going to expect a high level of rigour with those concerns: environmental, safety, social. We in terms of compliance, we have to comply with local regulation, so local government, state government, environmental management, forest practices system. But then on a federal level, we also operate under AMSA, which is Australian Marine Safety Authority. There is a number of levels to be able to operate, which I think on first glance looks like there's not many barriers to entry, but there is actually incredibly quite a lot.
Yeah, right. And look, another key question we've been asked a lot is in around the resource base. Obviously, you're operating at Lake Palm at the moment with your licenses. That's around sort of 50 to 60,000 cubic meters, conservatively, of resource. But there's also the other lakes. So if you could talk about how that's looking and where you see that going forward.
Well, we've surveyed a number of lakes in Tasmania, and including Macintosh, Lake Gordon, which is a vast expanse of water. So there's an independent study, I think it's in the materials. It's about 300,000 cubic metres of recoverable soil out of all those lakes. So it's a significant resource, and then on top of that, that's not counting in potential for biomass or other things as well. So there's quite a significant resource. We'll be at Lake Palm for a while. It does take us a couple of weeks to pack up and move, so we'll finish that one first. But there's certainly significant quantities, and the next lake, which is likely, is only about 20 minutes up the road for us.
And just to put that in context, that 300,000 cubes and the 60,000 cubic metres on Lake Palm, the forecast that we're using are harvesting 8 to 10,000 cubic metres per annum. So if everything was to remain the same based on our forward estimates, we've got 30 years worth of resource in Tasmania. That's assuming no other growth, which we obviously think there's going to be.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting point. Some people have been likening, the hydroid opportunity almost like a mine or a resource. So you've got a 30-year resource life just at this site alone in that region, and that's before looking at other regions and other areas. So it's pretty material.
Jump across, Quinn. Probably don't need to see us again. So Paul Viney. I don't think Paul's on the call, but we asked Paul on board about 6 to 9 months ago as an independent chair. Very experienced non-executive director and chair. He was the CFO of MyState Limited in Tasmania, has been on boards and been CFOs on a number of companies. Feel free to look him up on LinkedIn. but he's going to be keeping David on the straight and narrow, and he's a really great chair to have on. We're really pleased to have him on board. Next.
Dave and Andrew, probably be worth giving a bit of background on yourself as well, in terms of how you landed in this business too.
Dave can go first.
Yeah, we started, the parent company to Hydrowood, SFM back in 2001, fresh out of university, or about fresh out of university, and have been working in forestry and environmental consulting management roles since that time. So, a bit over 20 years. And we've grown the business up. We now manage, as Andrew said previously, significant estates for fund managers across Tasmania and what we call a green triangle, but based out of Mount Gambier, with just under 30 staff across that business, with various levels of certification, including FSC and PEFC. We enjoyed growing that business, and we've enjoyed having Hydrowood come out of that. So it's that mix of skill sets across forestry, environmental, and some maritime qualifications that's put all this thing together.
I'll start with a question there, Nick. The resource. So in terms of the risk of not getting another contract in Tasmania, so we've got a 5+5 year license over Lake Pyman. We're in ongoing and active discussions with Hydro Tasmania, who manages the lakes. We're certainly seen as a very good custodian of the lake. We've been there for a long time. We haven't had any environmental or safety issues. I think the risk is low that we wouldn't get another lake. They know that we want to move stepwise through the lakes. They actually have, in my mind, a mandate to remove the trees because they actually are emitting methane. And so if you look at the Tasmanian environment, with their move towards net zero, there's a drive for them to remove trees. There's also, wanting to remove them from a navigational hazard point of view, and there's a couple of drivers there. And so, look, I think it's very likely that we'll move into the next group of lakes. They're not going to give us 6 lakes all at once. That's just not their nature. But I don't think they're going to give it to somebody else simply due to what we're Tasmanian. There's a Tasmanianist piece to this that we're very well, I think, regarded politically across all parties, Labor, Liberal and the Greens. We have a level of respect there with them. We work well with Hydro Tasmania. We work well with the other government agencies because we need to, and we understand the political environment. So I think the risk is low to very low.
In fact, we're engaged by the state-owned irrigation organisation recently to do some work. So we've worked across various government platforms as well. So because they saw our expertise based out of Hydrowood in forestry.
Yeah, great. Look, I think it's probably, you just touched on then sort of the support you're getting across all groups of Parliament, the Labor, the Liberals, and the Greens. I think that's quite a telling point. I think you mentioned in the past you have had that tripartite support, and generally can deal with any key questions around concerns around environment or sort of green activism.
Yeah, I mean I guess the brand and the provenance and the story are all very important, but it all hinges on good custodianship of the lake and good environmental management systems. That's been it's been paramount for us. Environmental and safety systems, and that's through a pedigree of having good forestry. And the David's and my and SFM's good forestry outcomes, FSC certification, managing large assets for funds, so very strong focus on governance and environmental concerns and safety. Funds, when we're talking about assets of hundreds of millions of dollars, investors and their funds don't offer that to property managers easily. There's a number of hoops to jump through, and we've built up a very strong rapport with the likes of New Forest and Mitsui. to be managers for them. And that pedigree carries over into Hydrowood. It's a really important aspect. And it goes back to that respect piece. I mean, the Greens in Tasmania actually wrote Hydrowood into their forest policy. We should do more Hydrowood. They didn't consult with us, but they put it in their policy, which is fantastic. It's good to have that support, and we continue to engage broadly in terms of stakeholders, make sure we are telling our story and making sure that everyone's comfortable with what we're doing.
Garrett, look, another question that's come in is in and around your certainty of offtake. Like, where are you seeing the demand centers coming from, and what certainty do you have that all the product you produce will be sold in market?
I guess, well, this process has certainly generated a lot of interest. We've had furniture manufacturers who have come to us directly saying, we want to talk to you about taking 1,500 cubic meters of sawn product to produce furniture, and that's sort of half our total volume on a per annum basis. We've had people coming to us about what's happening in Victoria. Immediately upon that announcement, we've had a number of end processors who produce, mouldings on door handles, and they make a living out of it. That's their main industry, and they've seen that they're about to run out of timber because of that cessation of native forest logging. So they've come to us as an alternate solution. That Victorian announcement was serendipitous for us, obviously. It was just timing wise, it was great we're out doing this in the market. But what it has done is put a very strong focus on us in terms of providing an ethically sourced timber, but which is matched to native forest. It's of that same sort of quality.
And there's also some species that you simply can't get anymore. It's celery top pine. It's a wet rainforest timber. We're not harvesting wet rainforest anymore, really. So myrtle in large quantities. Blackwood certainly a quality timber that we're getting out, and it's of larger piece size than normal. As with the oak in that image right there, it's actually older timber. It's got very dense grain and great wood properties.
And just again to give some context to the size and scale or otherwise of Hydrowood, so if we're producing 8,000 to 10,000 cubic meters of sawlog a year, and that's what we've used in our forecasts. To give that some context, Tasmania terrestrially harvests 137,000 cubic meters of sawlog per annum, and the Victorian forest industry was doing around 300,000 cubes of sawlog per annum. So we're not the panacea here. We're not going to fix the shortage problem that's been created by some of those issues. We're a very small subset of that. But that just goes to show you the demand. We're not trying to fill that sort of supply. We've only got to do 10,000 a year, which is less than 10%, much less than 10%.
That goes to actually a question that's come through in around the ability for you to scale up production.
Yeah, well, and that's, I guess, that's why we're doing this. So this is a very working capital hungry process. It's about taking that timber and harvesting it, processing it through the mill, and then putting it into the shed for 12 to 18 months. That's where the working capital is required. That's why we want to increase productivity, because up to this point we've been doing it organically. So it's been us trying to build a business on an organic basis. This is now about supercharging it and driving it further. There is a point where, from a productivity point of view, you would need another system, another harvesting unit, and that's obviously a capital outlay. Again, we're not focused on that. We're about maximising that piece of equipment, or that set of equipment we've got, to its best ability, and then we can revisit it. But if we get this thing to 10,000 cubes, as you'll see in the figures, it's really starting to punch out some good revenue and profits.
Yeah, look, there's another question that's come through as well, in and around the lifespan of the usable wood. How long can the wood actually last and survive underwater?
Yeah, really good question. In salt water, it's actually interesting, having just been in Canada. it does deteriorate. But we're in freshwater. It's also, that water is also very cold. Most of the time it sits at around 10 degrees Celsius. It's also dark. So because of the tannins in the water in Lake Pyman, it gets very little light. So it would last for an awfully long time in underwater, as long as it remains submerged. And that's actually one of the reasons we chose Lake Pyman as the first lake. Firstly, of the 60 fishing lakes in Tasmania, I think it's number 60 on the list. So very few trout anglers.
I've still haven't caught a fish out of that.
No. And we operate to grab sawlog from beneath the water. So we don't want timber that's been constantly re-exposed to the air. And that is why Lake Pyman's perfect for us, because it's got a very small range. So if it remained underwater in that environment, unexposed to air, I think its underwater lifespan would be potentially hundreds of years. It would be a very, very long time.
But I think it's important to know that each lake has different environmental variables that would mean that each lake needs testing in the timber, because that wetting, redrying, what was the conditions when it went underwater, that's why each lake particularly needs to have that testing. And each timber, you take Huon pine, celery top pine, they're more likely to survive for a longer period of time than something like myrtle. So there's differences in the species and its longevity under the water as well.
I think the oldest log we actually got it carbon dated, didn't we? What
2,200 years.
Yeah,
that was Huon pine.
2,000 years old. Yeah.
I think that's another question that's been asked a bit about. What percentage of the wood coming out is actually Huon pine, which is really the diamond in the rough.
Less than 1%, Nick. It's very rare in the environment at the best of times, and it's even rarer underwater because Huon pine was actually the main one species that was recovered. So the reason why this resource is still there is that it was in a steeply incised valley. I guess value of the resource back then was low because we had a broad range. It was much easier to get elsewhere. People didn't value species like they do now. So celery top pine up until the 1980s was being used for railway sleepers. We're now selling it into the market as boards at $8,000-9,000 a cubic metre. It simply wasn't in society's mindset that these species were unique or in scarce supply. We think back to the 80s, sustainability wasn't even really a word. But it wasn't in people's psyche.
Yeah, I think on that point, it's probably worthwhile giving a bit of a snapshot on the economics in terms of the sort of cost of extraction on a rough estimate and sort of what sort of gross margins you're looking at on a go-forward basis.
Yeah, so broadly speaking, it costs us about $2,000 a cubic metre to take a log out of the water, put it through the process, and have it packed ready for sale at the end of that process after 18 months. We could, depending on the species, we can sell that product from anywhere between about $3,000 up to about $8,000 to $9,000 a cubic metre. We've used in our forecast for simplicity a weighted average of $4,000 a cube. So in essence, we're spitting out a doubling your money scenario, 100% margin. Now, as we see, as we ramp up, the cost of each unit should drop. It will drop down over time because we're doing more. And so we should see some efficiency in there. But generally speaking, we're using that $4,000 a cubic metre. And roughly speaking, we're about 20% more expensive than a like terrestrial species. So if you went and got a piece of Vic ash and Tazo and Hydrowood oak, we're about 20% more expensive. And we think for the provenance and the story and the ethical nature of it, we think that's pretty reasonable.
I suppose just as Andrew and Dave have been referencing, they did prepare some fairly detailed forecasts with an accounting firm to sort of get a better feeling for the profitability of the business on the longer term, and based on the ramp up they're talking about, they're looking to achieve revenues of in the vicinity of over $10 million around sort of FY 27-28 at a 50% profit margin. That sort of ends up with an EBITDA range of $4 to $5 million. So on a pre-money equity valuation of $7 million, it's a pretty good return over that sort of short to medium term for investors. I think that's, it goes to a question we've had from a lot of people as well, is in and around what is the financial return that business is going to provide.
Yep.
And I think normally Paul would answer that question, but he's not on the call tonight because he's been caught up. But you know, the company does have every expectation about to pay dividends once they hit that profitability point, which, you know, based on their forecast is in that period of sort of FY26.
I notice there's another question there, Nick, on opportunity for franchising. So, look, I think that's one model. As I said on that opportunities slide, I think the IP here is the knowledge base that we have and the experience. So, if you take Brazil for example, I don't think we would have a risk appetite to go and operate in Brazil. We don't speak the language. It's on the other side of the world. But I think being able to, as Dave said, build them a unit using our naval architecture here, set them up over a year, impart our knowledge to them, and do that as on a profitable basis is one model. Franchising or some other royalty-based opportunity may present itself. I think it's each one based on risk and the factors involved in it. So yeah, I definitely think there's an opportunity. I think we need a little bit more work on what the actual mechanism is, and I don't think there's one single answer for each opportunity as they present.
Look, as more questions do come in, the other question that's been coming across a bit is I suppose elaborating a bit more on the biomass opportunity and how you might see that playing out.
So, in regards to the biomass opportunity, we're already having inquiries from large, I guess, renewable green chemical producers in Tasmania, and green methanol, green hydrogen, biofuel. They're all being driven by the need for fibre to basically burn, for burning, or to break down the cellulosic properties of the timber. And some plantations, so terrestrial plantations, may be able to supply some of that. But they need biomass to be able to generate these products at scale. As I said before, and as Dave said, the Hydrowood piece, the piece that makes the timber, the boards that goes into flooring and furniture, is the piece that stay below the water level. But there's a piece of timber usually sticking up above the water level. That is no good for Hydrowood in its core purpose, but it still burns very well and it burns very cleanly. And so we think there's an opportunity here that we can actually take that and generate a separate revenue stream for that. Now, that may be that we look at doing, teeing that into chips and then moving it through. We may actually even look at partnering with someone and doing our own biomass plant. So there's some significant opportunities in playing in that space with some significant partners who have got very deep pockets, who are interested in doing some of these green chemical projects. And I think we're all hearing about them around Australia as we move towards net zero and decarbonising the country. We're looking at new energy sources and new ways of developing some of these chemicals that we've probably used. In the past, we've just used coal fire to generate the power to make them.
There is a view of methodology, carbon credit methodology for tropical hardwoods in dams, but we'd have to, and that's one of the pieces of work we do, is some of our carbon team probably come across from SFM to have a look at actually putting that methodology down into the Tasmanian environment. The water's a lot colder, the timber's different, so there is some science to go into that to get that methodology verified, and that's one of the things we'd start undertaking as a project.
Yeah, great. Look, were there if there's any other questions that people might have, feel free to throw them up to us now. Another question that's come in, I suppose, what is your long-term vision for Hydrowood? Like, where do you see the business being in 5 years or 10 years?
Do you want to do that one?
Well, we should still be like Climate for certainly another few years. I'd like to think that by that time we'd have identified the next lake and be ready to, 5 years or certainly 10, to be ready to move along to the next one. And then we'd have number 3 lined up for that system. We'd have constant and growing production systems, distribution networks through into furniture, flooring, architectural, boat building. We've had inquiries about wine barrels, wine and whiskey barrels, which is an interesting one because there's no sap in our timber, so apparently it could be used potentially as a barrel resource. France is an area that's struggled with bushfires in some of their French oak production areas. So that was one inquiry that was coming very recently. And I certainly would like to think that we would have done some international consulting work and provided our IP over to some of those organisations. And the ones that we're on foot right now is Brazil and in British Columbia. So I think there's a strong future of the business, and certainly looking forward to the next 5 years.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add to that, I think we're moving towards this, and that is that Hydrowood is somewhat ubiquitous. When people think about reclaimed timber, they immediately think of Hydrowood, and I think in Tasmania that's already started to happen. And so, fast forward 5 years, we've been very close in the past to having some very significant commercial builds, hotels, where they're saying we want to fit out the whole hotel with Hydrowood. We've got a very strong, environmental view of where we want to source timber from, and those projects take a long time to come to fruition. But I think, fast forward to that 5 year period, Nick, we're going to have hotels that are almost exclusively fitted out with Hydrowood in the appearance. I think, obviously we're not talking about construction timber here. This is about those appearance grade and those appearance products. But I think with where society's going around, where they're sourcing their materials from, we're going to continue to be seen as a leader and a solution to those appearance grade timbers for a long way into the future.
Yeah, look, on that point, if someone's a timber lover and aficionado, a home woodworker, how would they be able to get access to the timber?
Simply give us a call, send us an email, and Darren, our manager of sales, will certainly be happy to provide you with whatever you need.
So in terms of the distribution model, we're very much going towards a direct distribution model at the moment. We've got a distributor in Melbourne, not exclusive, but we use them. They've been stocking the timber. But on those larger projects, we're using a direct distribution model because the story and the provenance is really unique. And we found that when we started to push it out to a timber merchant, people were losing the story. We were actually, we've sent people in to distributors that stock Hydrowood and have had people ask, what's Hydrowood about? And people's response was, I don't know, it's just wood. It kind of loses its appeal. So selling directly enables us to be able to continue that story and really drive that premium piece. And it's why I guess we've got a couple of projects locally in Tasmania at the moment that we're directly talking to the architect and the clients, and it's the story, it's the provenance, it's the brand. That's why they're talking to us, and that's why they want to use our product over something else.
Look, very good. Thanks, guys. Look, I think we've exhausted all the questions that have come through. Were there any final comments you wanted to make about the process or anything else?
Look, just to thank everyone. I mean, we've kind of been blown away by the results so far. I think we're hopefully sort of pushing past 1.9 by the time we get off this call today, and moving towards 2. And obviously we can max out at 5. But with 7 days to go, it's somewhat humbling to have 385. I think at last new shareholders. And if anyone's sitting on the fence, jump in, and it'd be great to have you on board.
Yeah, certainly thank everyone for their support. It's been great.
Yeah, look, thanks for that, Andrew. Thanks, David. Look, as mentioned, yeah, the offer is open until next Thursday. The minimum investment parcel is $500, and obviously there's no limit on the upper end. To invest over $10,000, you do need to qualify as a sophisticated investor, but we can help you through that process. You know, as a shareholder, you know, as an investor in Hydrowood, you are a shareholder. You know, you do receive equity and sitting along the same level as Andrew and Dave. And you know, basically, you know, we do love businesses where the founders are so passionate about their product. You know, they're doing crowdfunding for the right reason, which is basically, you know, enabling lovers of their product, lovers of what they're doing, and Tasmanians to become part of the story, and participate in the success on the way forward. And ultimately, they are really focused on getting a strong return for investors. You know, some of the other questions we've received is in around what is an exit opportunity here. Paul Viney, the chairman, has talked a lot about, you know, he'd love to see the business listing, but only at the right time, and that's when they do hit profitability and they've got a great growth story ahead of them. So that's in sort of in a 2 to 3 year period. There are other opportunities here about potentially being purchased by a larger player, but you know, the Andrew and Dave and Paul are very focused on getting a you know, as I said, a solid financial return for people's investment money as well. So that's definitely the core of their focus, as well as, you know, building a great business and doing something different. But yeah, so look, if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank everyone for joining tonight. We will be recording this webinar and sharing it around. So look, thanks for joining, and if you do have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out through the Q&A function on the crowdfunding page, or shoot us an email directly, and we'll be very happy to light up a one-on-one session for anyone who's keen with Andrew and Dave. Absolutely. Or one or the other if you don't want to speak to either of them. But it's we can very happy to sort that out. But
thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone. Good night.
Thanks, Nick. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.